Okay, the meeting will then be officially called to order. Please stand as trustee Medina will lead us in invocation and the pledges of allegiance.
Almighty and merciful God, we ask you for your guidance and blessings upon this board, students, parents and patrons, teachers and administrators, as we assemble here this evening in the common pursuit of this great nation's wealth, our children. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible. All right, so really the only thing on the agenda takes us to item 12, business and finance, and we will have a budget review.
Yes, ma'am. Just want to, as we start our meeting, just if I could, welcome Dr. Barajas. Very happy to have him here. I'm glad each of you have had at least a brief opportunity to meet Renee. We're certainly very pleased that he's here. Renee's been here exactly a week, and so we asked Wes to give the budget review tonight, and Renee and I'll interject as we go along, and happy to answer any questions you might have.
Right. Thank you. Good evening, Board and Superintendent. Hope you all are doing well tonight. It's that time of the year to have our initial discussion about the 2021 budget. Administration has had a couple of initial meetings to start the conversation, and so we will dive right in. We'll discuss what's happening on the national and the state level. We'll talk a little bit today about what's happening in the current budget, and we'll talk a little bit today about the assumptions that we're going to use going forward into the 2021 budget, and then we'll talk about a timeline to accomplish all of that.
Thank you.
Well, backwards. There we go. On the national landscape, the district does receive funds directly from the federal government or through its state agencies that take care of those monies. Last year, in 18-19, the district received $133 million in federal funds. About $88 million of that came through grants and entitlements. About $44 million of that was received in the general fund. Most of those monies were received by performance services that were Medicaid or SHARS eligible. We received much more in Medicaid funding than we did last year because the Texas Department of Health and Human Services wanted to shorten the timeline for payment, so they paid us for 2 years worth of funds. That won't happen again. They're caught up to where they want to be at this time. So the district will receive in 1920 instead of the $40 million range, we'll get about $24 million in Medicaid funding, which is more than norm. We didn't have a whole lot to talk about at the federal level. It had been pretty quiet until yesterday. And President Trump put forward his proposal for the Department of Education to cut funding by $6.2 billion, and under the guise of returning the power to the states and streamlining federal programs. That's about a 10% cut, just a little bit under a 10% cut in funding for that department. This was similar to a proposition that he made before that was dismantled in Congress. They actually increased funding instead of decreasing funding, but it is worth noting that in the Education Freedom Scholarships program was put into his proposal again this year. That contains $1 billion in funding this year and $5 billion annually thereafter for for funding to be used towards private school vouchers.
Wes,
ma'am.
Ms. Freeman has a real quick question.
Shoot.
At the federal level too, IDEA, is that been cut? Is there any increased funding for IDEA?
You know, there was a $400 million in January. They had discussed taking forward a $400 million increase to funding in that. I haven't heard anything about it since January, early in January. That $400 million was nationally, so that'll be a drop in the bucket for them, and when it trickles down to us, it'll be a drop as well if it gets passed. What they did talk about in this proposal today was taking Title I IDA funding, take it all into one bucket and pass it through to states to be used as they will.
If that happens,
Wow.
dollar-wise, what does that mean for us?
Ballpark it in the $10 to $15 million a year range. But, you know, Wes made the point that this similar proposal was made in the past and wasn't, you know, executed at all. And of course, none of these things are going to happen in a material way prior to elections in November. So, you know, this is the season for campaigning. Let's just keep that in mind as proposals get floated, you know.
The only other item discussed at the national level is how the Fed addresses their funds policy. Interest rates have fallen about 60 basis points from last year. You know, so our investments aren't earning near what they were at this time last year, but our debt transactions are going extremely well because of that. The only control the federal government has over that is their short-term federal funds rate. And right now, that's at 1.5 to 1.75 is the target range that they operate within. And most of the people in the know out there say that they'll probably lower that again this year. But from what I've seen, the likelihood of that has gone down just a little bit. Just a little bit. All right. Let's talk about, are there any questions regarding the national landscape that y'all want to talk about? All right. Boy, that's a really good clicker. That's two at a time.
They told me it was a new one for you.
Yeah, but it didn't have a laser pointer on it. That was the. Yeah, let's do this one. I need my Debbie McNearly laser pointer there. State landscape. Okay. Of course, in October, the comptroller released his revenue estimates for the next biennium. And of course, in the last legislative housing, they passed a little piece of legislation that affected education funding called House Bill 3. And we'll talk about that in a second. Over the last, from 2010 to 2018, property values have gone up statewide of about 40%. I don't have 2019 information wasn't available at the time that I'm making this presentation, but it should be coming pretty soon to get a feel for what happened last year. Of course, the district went up almost 8%, right? You hear consistently in the news about record sales tax collections for the state, and that's going to have a bearing in a couple of slides. I'm starting to jump ahead of myself. So let's talk about what happened. Just review briefly. I'm using the wrong clicker again. Got to have both of them. I'm going to set this one down. Just review briefly what happened with House Bill 3. I say they added the basic allotment. They actually changed the basic allotment for the first time in quite a while. We went from $5,140 a student to $6,160 a student, about a 20% increase. They made significant changes to compensatory education, which yielded the district about $78 million in 1920, or that's our current estimate of that. They did add a college career and military readiness allotment. That is an outcomes allotment. That's somewhat new in that the district, the TEA, nobody really knows how to collect that information right now. They're all working hard at that. But the estimates right now from the TEA say that we're going to get about $6 million in college career and military readiness. And I'll go ahead and mention that it somewhat takes the place of the high school allotment. We got about $8 million a year on high school allotment, and that's gone now. Dual language was added. It's a portion of bilingual. We get about $5 million in allotted funds for bilingual. Early education was added. That's about $12 million this year. And dyslexia was added as an allotment, and that is about $2 million a year or $2 million in 1920, excuse me, is the current estimate. Everything except college career and military readiness are based on student counts that we know and can track. Two items that did go away were the staff salary allotment, which was I believe, a 2000 carryover related to insurance costs, and that's gone away, and they have eliminated the gifted and talented allotment.
Let me just ask, Brian, we're still responsible, though, from an accountability standpoint, on showing what we're doing with gifted and talented, though, correct?
Yeah, none of the requirements went away. The specific funding allotment went away. It just got rolled into the basic allotment.
Okay.
It doesn't come as a separate line item.
And I believe we still have to continue to use that particular program intent code.
That's correct.
I got all kinds of gadgets up here now.
So Wes, with the allotments, and Renee, with the allotments that were eliminated, is it really an elimination, or was it a repurposing to the added basic allotment, compensatory, college and career? Both. And did it come with like the purposes for the money? So with college and career and military readiness, how are we supposed to spend it? Because when we first got high school allotment, there wasn't any guidelines and everybody was doing everything.
There were a few suggestions back when they first
Exactly,
came
but
out
no
with
way
the
to
high school allotment.
evaluate either, too. Just,
They've given us some basic guidelines on college career and military
do you
readiness.
remember what, I don't remember seeing what those are. Like to increase programs for,
I think the requirements were a bit vague, and that
Okay.
these are questions a lot of districts are having regarding these new funding allotments.
Okay.
And I think that either through commissioners' rules to find out exactly, here's the bag of money and here's the little attachment that says here's how you can use it. Of course, we all look for that because you want to make sure that any programs that are put into place, follow these particular items. Comp Ed is a good example. Here's the different type of student who falls into that economically disadvantaged, or how you can use it. So House Bill 3 is going to have a long-lasting effect of trying to iron out some of these things and how we're going to be using the dollars in relation to how the state intends us. And I think the commissioner is still making rules regarding
Okay.
how we need to use those funds.
And this is an area where they haven't even started rule writing yet.
Wow.
So we got a ways to go.
Yeah, if you look at the basic guidelines they've given for CCMR and you compare them to the objectives, and I truthfully don't even know if these are state objectives or just Northside District objectives related to high school allotment. Objectives 2 and 3 are related to advanced placement, dual credit, all those UT on-ramps, all those things qualify under CCMR. I've done some preliminary work on that. I'm not near finished yet, but if you take the basically $8 million that the district currently budgets for high school allotment and take those objectives, there's about $4.5 million in there right now that on the surface it looks like it's going to be really easy to move that from high school allotment to college career military readiness, which helps us do the very surface issue of complying with the 55% spending requirement that the state puts on us with the $6 million in CCMR funding. But we've got a lot of work to go in that arena. Long ways to go.
So Brian, I remember when we had the high school allotment, and a lot of districts just used it to fund the programs that they already had in place, and we made a real effort to develop new programs using that money. So with that in mind, will the CCNR, is that what it, we'll just use the money to fund the programs we have now, or do you anticipate that we'll be using it to develop new programs?
I think that depends on more detailed information that'll come out of rulemaking. It's too early to say that.
Too early for that right
My
now?
speculation would be we'll do some of both. There'll be we'll subsume some of those dollars into programming we have now that we're pleased with, and then there'll probably be some requirements that we don't yet know about.
So the three main points of emphasis in House Bill 3 was to increase school funding, to address teacher compensation, and to provide property tax relief. All the details that we talked about related to increased school funding, the district got about 56 million more this year than they did last year, and we'll talk a little bit more about what we barely know about 2021 a little bit farther on. Teacher compensation, you would remember that in the summer, jumping through the hoops to ensure that 30% of the increase in funding we got went to teachers and counselors and nurses, and then as far as property tax reform is concerned, we did have lower our tax rate on the M&O side from $1.04 down to 93 cents. It was compressed to 93 cents, and then we used 4 golden pennies to bring it up to 97 cents. We'll talk a little bit more about what that's going to look like in 2021. That is going to be an interesting conversation. But as far as the state as a whole and the communication that the comptroller put out in October, he did state that there was $121 billion available for appropriation. That's about 9.6 over the prior biennium, 9.6%, excuse me, over the prior biennium, and that does coincide with all of the articles you might see about record sales tax collection. The Texas economy did grow by 4.4% in 2018. That's a little bit above average. Their outgoing expectations are a little bit lower right there, nice and conservative, just like Northside. One thing I did note about the state economy I've just been paying attention to is oil and gas has always been a consideration in the state economy, and if we look at we're right around 11%. The magic $50 a barrel. I actually looked today; it dropped below $50 a barrel today. And has been hovering around 50 all week. The rest of the year and the end of 2019, it had been doing really well. But I think there are some international factors impacting oil right now. What's happening in China, as Dr. Woods mentioned this morning, has a large impact on that.
One other thing I'd add quickly is that, while the state's done a good job of diversifying its economy so that oil and gas isn't, the sole driver of the economy, what happens is when you see, as Wes refers to, a significant drop in the price of oil, and that shuts down some of the fracking work in West Texas and in South Texas, you see big impacts on sales tax, motor vehicle tax, and others. So it has ripple effects. It's not, these things don't stand alone. If the oil industry is suffering, then you see it in other aspects of the economy, of course. So while it's not as big a portion of the economy as it was 20 years ago, it still has pretty big impact.
Are there any other questions on the state economy before we move on to the current budget? All right. In August, we approved about a $750 million tax levy. We're on pace to collect 98.5% of that, which is and we'll probably easily exceed that. We've done a good job of that year to year. The Bear County Tax Office and our good buddies at Linebarger always do a good job at that. Y'all have seen budget amendment number 1. Budget amendment number 2 is coming up in the next, in the February 25th board meeting, and our budget will reflect current spending patterns, and if we need to manage unassigned fund balance, we try to keep it at that 2.5%, 2.5 months of monthly expenditures. If we need to use our stabilization fund to increase or decrease that, we will utilize that fund to do so. All right, this is what the budget looks like right now after adoption of budget amendment number 1. The decrease in expenditures were the biggest factor. And I guess I would just want to make a note that the audited financial statements actually came in beginning fund balance, and you'll see that in BA2 came in at about $206 million. Okay, as far as fund balance is concerned, we have some familiar names up there. We will be opening Wernley Elementary next year and needing to get startup funds for the 2 schools that will be opening the year after that. That'll be included. We will always have to make allowance for health insurance costs. We know very little about that right now, but we're going to go ahead and make plans accordingly. We're going to have our regular technology deployments out of fund balance. We should be able to substantially wrap up the roofing projects from the 2016 hailstorm and the athletic projects that were pulled out of the 2018 bond referendum in 1920 to take care of administrative and roofing projects, and then state revenue deficits and future growth is what I referred to as our stabilization fund a little bit ago. And that will be presented with the final budget amendment in August. Some of the planning assumptions that we're using going into this budget planning season. The TEA has given a base compression of 91.64. In addition to that, we're required under House Bill 3 to compress further to the extent that, excuse me, that our property tax growth exceeds the state average, and they have estimated the state average at 4.1%. Our average over the last 4 years has been 7.7%. That's what I've used in planning. So preliminary calculations have our M&O tax rate being compressed to a base of 88.5.
So, wanted to take a minute on this. So, when we've had a conversation around tax compression one other time in all of our kind of memory. You all will remember there was a time where school districts were generally at $1.50, and then because there was a lot of concern about property taxes, as there frequently is, we went through a period where we compressed from $1.50 to $1, and then we were allowed to add 4 gold pennies on top of that, and so our M&O rate for many, many years was $1.04. That's just what we got used to, and it went to $1.04 via the vehicle called compression. That was one time. That was a one-time thing. It happened one time, and then that was it. It was stable after that. This notion of compression that we get in House Bill 3 is very different than that. The way that via school districts they're going to offer property tax relief is to have compression be ongoing if property values in a local community are higher than they would be at the state average. So Wes mentioned, state's estimating 4.1% across the state. If you look at our last few years, we're averaging between 7.5% and 8%. And so our rate will compress more than the state rate will. And for each year that happens, our rate will compress more and more and more. And so, so what we estimate, just from a think about it standpoint, is that we started this conversation last year in building the current budget, the 1920 budget, at a compressed rate of 93 cents. Everybody went to 93 cents, and then we were allowed to add the 4 gold pennies on top of that, so we're at 97. We knew that we were going to compress some more. So you see the base rate for the state is at 91.64, but we believe that because our values have typically come in higher than the state's, we'll be in the 88.5 type range when we finally approve an M&O budget. What happens is that this has become a TEA responsibility to do it for every district in the state, right? Based on what property tax growth looks like. So unlike in the past, where we brought you the same proposed M&O rate year after year after year, we will bring you a different M&O rate year after year after year. It'll be a different rate. And what'll happen is at this meeting in February, we'll start talking about it. In April, we ought to have a little better sense because we'll have something from the Bexar County folks, and then it'll be late in the process, July perhaps, before we're really ready to say, okay, this is the absolute done deal. This is the M&O rate. Now, it is. And so wanted to spend a couple of minutes and float that out tonight so that you start to gain some understanding of that. Realize this is a trade of where the dollars are coming from, right? It's not necessarily that the dollars are going to be different than they were in the year prior. It's just as tax rates compress locally, you're going to generate fewer local dollars than you would have otherwise, and they'll have to be made up with greater state dollars. That's the whole idea behind compression as a property tax relief vehicle. I mean, that's the whole way it works. Y'all remember when we finally started to understand House Bill 3, and some of us were saying things around sustainability. Is this sustainable? Can the state continue to afford to pay for it? This aspect of property tax compression is the main driver of why we've been saying that. Can the state continue to afford to pay for this as rates continue to go up and up and up? So that just gives you a sense about where we are with that business. So nothing changes with regard to the 4 golden pennies. The same 4 golden pennies we had when we compressed from $1.50 to $1, those same 4 golden pennies are with us through this current budget, the one we're in now. The one aspect that is going to be different, perhaps, is that there's a one-time shot for the 2020-21 budget that if the board could choose by unanimous vote to approve a 5th golden penny to be applied. So what you would have in essence is the tax rate compressing, the M&O rate going down over time, and then the board's got this one opportunity this coming spring/summer, as we build next year's budget, to consider a 5th golden penny. So I wanted to put that out there and make sure that folks understand that that's an option. That's a one-time thing, and I don't mean by one time that it's only good for that one budget year. I mean it's only accessible in one budgeting season, and it's accessible by board vote, but it would have to be a unanimous board vote.
1 penny's worth about $5.5 million.
Ms. Freeman?
Yes, thank you. So when we talk about, with House Bill 3 the planning assumptions are based on current year values instead of values from the previous year.
Yep.
So how are we figuring, did you just say that these are, and that is just estimated?
Yes.
This is just an estimate as to where our values are going to be?
Yes.
And tell us again when we will know those values? Which is obviously after we plan our budget. But
We'll get preliminary values in April, and then we'll get certified values in July.
Okay.
So it'll be late in the process. Now, well, I don't want to speculate. Never mind.
Well, keep in mind that we're talking taxable values will come to us in July. That's when most appraisal districts, except for Harris County, give you your certified values. The values of the comptroller or CPTAD is going to be giving us, we just received them for 2019, which we'll use for this current year. So everything is off kilter the way it used to be. So they've really upended how we have done things for a number of years, as Dr. Woods mentioned, the compression to $1.50, from $1.50 to, and then we were $1.33, then it went down to $1 with the 4 golden pennies. So there are still some times when you're thinking through these items where you have to stop and remember, oh, wait a minute, I have to think in terms of current year values. And that TEA is going to be setting our tax rate based on our compression, or rather our property value increases. So there's some couple of things that even back in the fall, a lot of questions TEA could not answer for school districts regarding the not only 1920, but especially 2021, and how are you going to develop your budget for 2021 when we have to have the state set our tax rate for the next year? Because as Dr. Woods mentioned, most districts were at $1.04, you went down to 97 cents, it was easy. But in the second year of the biennium, it's a little bit more difficult, and the more complex, the bigger the district you are, there are some things that we're going to have to go through. All of us are in the state. So the delaying of getting our final TEA approved, here's what your M&O rate is going to be along with the values, make it even better for us because we're an August 31st district versus a June 30th. I'm so glad that we are August 31st, because being a June 30th fiscal year-end district really puts you under the gun, especially when you have a
Summer
bill
programs too.
as late as House Bill 3 being passed in late May, and you have 2-3 weeks to figure it out and incorporate it into a budget. So I'm glad we are where we are because we have some time to figure this out.
Mr. Blunt?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I may be jumping ahead, but I'm curious on if we have the option for the accessibility for the additional golden pennies just this year, do we want to limit the improvements to compelling initiatives, or this may be the opportunity to maybe go a little bit broader, important initiatives or something?
Yeah, it's a good question. One of the things that we may do, Mr. Blunt, when we bring growth and improvement in April, is be a little more clear about this is what we originally budgeted and this is what we're going to propose, just so you have a sense. We typically bring a number bigger than the one that we budget anyway for growth and improvement, and a lot of it, as you know, is in various improvement projects that you've seen that we've begun, but we know we want to continue and push out further. It's a good question. We'll try to think about that as we come in April with growth and improvement suggestions.
I had a real quick question. I don't know if it was Wes or Dr. Woods that said this, but you said now TEA has taken this over. Remind me, who had it before TEA? Was there a department at the state, or?
Well, you did truth in taxation. Essentially, you develop your rollback rate. You've heard that term.
We did it.
We did it.
Exactly, and it was predicated on the two components.
Right.
The INS rate was how much you're going to be paying back, but with the state being responsible, TEA, it really changes things because it's now based on your property value
Yeah.
increases. I've seen a table that has been distributed around the state about what your expected M&O rate could be based on your property value growth, and I think the property value growth estimates go all the way up to what if you had a 17% growth in property values? Your M&O rate is down in the low 80s, high 70 cents, with those pennies on top of it. So, yeah, this is very strange.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there is a floor this year, 82 cents, I think it is, that you can't go under, but there's a lot of nuance to that. I don't think we'll have to worry about that kind of growth, but you never know. You never know. Going past the tax rate, we've got assumptions around compensation. This is early in the process to talk about compensation, but one thing that we did want to emphasize is that the 30% of state funding that we dealt with last year, that does not apply this year. That only applies in the years where the basic allotment changes. And the basic allotment has not changed, so we do not have to apply the 30% of state funding.
What do we use as our assumption for compensation, 2%?
2%.
Right. The INS tax rate, we'll talk about a little bit more, but I did want to remind the board that from the 2018 bond authorization that we are scheduled to consider $206 million in new money in the 2021 year, and that we have an $82 million refunding from the 2012 bond issue. That's the current amount is $82 million. That's going to be a year from August, and then we also have a year from June, the 2016 variable rate obligation that will either reset or fix out, and that currently stands at $73 million. Both of those transactions will help us do some tax rate management, and hopefully we'll have a great rate environment to do that in as well. As far as the debt service tax rate itself, right now we're running on the assumption that the INS rate will remain at 33.55. That's going to be 0.0099 lower than what we told the public it would go to when they approved the 2018 authorization.
Ms. Chumley, you had a question?
I do, and we don't need to change the slide. So only compelling initiatives will be considered. How are you going about collecting compelling initiatives, Brian?
We have a process where, and it's a regular process, where staff submit in the spring. The packages go through kind of a cabinet level of authorization before they can get entered into the system. Then senior staff sees the entire package, and we bump it up against where we are with compensation and everything else, because it's all coming out of the same pot of money. And only projects approved through that process get to come to the board.
And so if a principal has some initiatives that they're working on, or staff members have, brought up stuff to a principal, when does that need to be submitted, or?
The timeline is the submission window's open now. Senior
that's what I
staff
thought.
looks at those projects in second half of March.
Yes.
Yeah, to bring to the board starting in mid-April.
So they need to be doing that right now, or already have?
Yeah, if it
that.
hasn't been discussed in depth with a cabinet member by now, that ain't gonna happen.
Deadline for submission is February 24th.
Okay, so do all our principals know, Brian? Do you think they're all pretty much on board and aware of when they need to get
Yeah,
that information to you?
most of these projects aren't submitted at the campus level. These are because of we don't examine projects that are small dollar impacts. We're looking at pretty good sized projects here. So these typically are not campus level projects unless they are projects that impact multiple campuses, in which case obviously we consider it.
Okay.
Yeah, but a principal with an initiative would need to go through their supervisor. Rarely do those come through growth and improvement.
Okay.
Does anybody have any questions about the debt service tax rate?
You're good.
All right. An initial run at what we're expecting from a revenue perspective on state funding. Tier 1 would yield just under 800 million in funding, very similar to what we're looking at this year. With all the changes in values and rates, it's yielding about the same. This was a very preliminary run, but I did get a TASBO, the Center for Public Finance. We had them take a look at it as well, and they sent it back to me the other day, and it was within 1%. So as far as we know right now, this is what we're looking at from a revenue perspective. This does assume 4 golden pennies.
Okay.
All right. Property taxes are going to go up just a little bit, and because of that, state funding will go down just a little bit. The biggest change that we're looking at right now is a reduction in transfer from reserves. This number that you're seeing is where I was in evaluating Budget Amendment 2. It looks like it's going to, after we've seen the audited 2018-19 numbers, what fund balance really looks like when it's all said and done. That's the biggest change you're looking at there.
I think it's important to mention, Ms. Chumley, did you see the TRS stays pretty stable? So that's good to know.
That is good.
With your recent announcement, that's really good.
TRS on behalf is an accounting entry. That's not real dollars. We're required to account for that.
It's the bane of my existence.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't understand why it's not real dollars. What does that mean?
You have to recognize as a district the amount that has been assigned to you from a TRS perspective, so you recognize
your
it both as a
liability.
revenue and an expenditure. So it's as though
Just nothing.
it's just
comes and
nothing,
goes.
yes.
Okay.
So when you're doing an analysis.
Satisfying the CPAs of the world.
Exactly.
But
give
it's
them-
not like there's $42 million sitting in an account designated for Northside people that's sitting with us. That's not.
It's a shame.
It's
Oh,
purely an
okay.
accounting thing.
It's happening at the state level.
So, yeah, sorry, there is no.
It
Sorry
means a
about
lot
that.
to the
Sorry,
employees.
But
To the employees, it doesn't mean anything to the district.
Sorry,
A good thing to think about
I know,
anyway.
right?
Now, when the state does
it would be
increase
pretty to think so.
Well, there
the
was,
district's contribution, the 1.5% that we actually all contribute into the system to prop up, yes, then when those dollars go up, then that is an expense to Northside and every other school district. When you give raises, for instance, it increases the differential between the statutory minimum and what you're paying. You're paying more into TRS at that particular. So the TRS on behalf is just imagine you get your checkbook and you write in a deposit for $1 billion and then you write a check for $1 billion. It's just an in and out. It's an accounting entry. It means nothing.
Let me ask you, so I remember for years and years and years in trying to help be able to explain how schools are funded, we would tell our constituents that they'd say, well, there's so much growth, and we'd say, right, and we get the use of that, we get the benefit of that growth for 1 year, and then the next year, the state takes it away from us. So now when we're talking about using, I guess I'm gonna call it real-time growth or real-time, how do we explain that? What would be how's a good way of explaining that? Because that was easy for people to understand, is when they'd see all this growth and we'd say, we have this for 1 year, but then we lose it the next year because the state takes that money away from us. But
So-
now that's not really the case.
Yeah, so
since we're
what's-
using real-time
Right.
evaluations.
Yeah, the lag has gone away, which is a net negative for a district like Northside, because they were using prior year values, we appeared to be more poor than we were, and we were getting additional state dollars. So that aspect of it has gone away. The notion of districts where values are growing, supporting the rest of the state that's not growing as much or as quickly is still true. It's absolutely still the case. Nothing has changed there. So if somebody says to you, hey, I see all this new commercial construction and single family housing and all of this, y'all get all those dollars, why aren't you able to do all this great stuff? You're saying a big chunk of those dollars is still leaving to support the state's other functions, much of which isn't even K-12 education, right? It's floating the state's budget. And House Bill 3 is a reset to that, and, they came back, they've improved that situation to a degree, but it doesn't change the fundamental fact, right? School district and property taxes paid to school districts are still supporting a big chunk of the state's budget.
I think it's just made it harder, Brian, to explain it.
Yep, it has.
The expenditure portion of our forecast will start with a base budget of $946 million that's carried over from the 1920 budget. The federal programs and health insurance, don't ask me what part of that is federal programs, that's mostly health insurance, it's $2.9 million. Along with our 2% planning estimate, that translates to about $16 million in additional compensation. Technology's deployment of $5 million is a planned multi-year deployment. New schools translate to $3.3 million, and then growth and improvements of $12 million.
What is the percentage that we factor for the estimated sweep, the in year?
2.5%.
And what have we been averaging the last couple of years?
Last few years, it's been between 4 and 5.
I remember
big.
years ago where
That's interesting.
we would have a really low estimated percentage, and then we'd come in at 8 and 9%. So we really shouldn't, you're comfortable at the 2 or 2.5%?
Yeah, we're comfortable at the 2.5. We'd rather not be coming in at 4 or 5, but we'll make some adjustments to try to correct that. 8 and 9 is not good,
Yeah,
right?
that
That's
was
not a healthy situation,
Mr.
but
Rawlinson actually
yeah.
corrected that right away with Mr. DeLuca.
yeah,
Time when we didn't have it in fund balance either.
yeah, and that's changed significantly, as we're getting ready to show you in the next slide.
Thank you.
Here is an excerpt from our budget forecasting model. Taking some of the assumptions that we've talked about. What do we, the thing that I want to immediately go to, and I need to slow down, but I don't need to push that button either. Where's I got too many devices. Sorry. Okay. So what we're looking at right now with BA2 is adding to our commitment to state revenue deficits of about 27 million, and then spending that out with conservative assumptions. This is built on a couple of things. It's built on the assumption that the tax rate is not going to go down, which we know is not going to happen, and it's also built on consistent 2% compensation increases, and property tax values going up 3.5%. Those are the three main assumptions that drive this. But we build it up a little bit this year, and then based on conservative assumptions, we're going to have to start spending down to maintain unassigned fund balance at that 2.5. We try to get somewhere close to 2.5 months of operating expenditures, and to keep it in that range, which is just under 200 million, we're going to have to use it till the last year. That 55 million that we'd have to use out of our stabilization fund, that drains it dry. It's at zero at that point in time.
So just a reminder, because we show you this a couple of times a year, and this one looks very similar to the way it looked at this time last year and the way it looked the year before, because we're using conservative assumptions, and that's built on top of the state's conservative assumptions. And so what you see here is we're going to be able to afford to set some additional dollars aside in fund balance in the current school year, 1920, and then perhaps start to draw down those dollars starting in 2021. Again, though, this pattern has been repeated the last 2 or 3 years, and so overall feel pretty good about where the budget stands, both from a year-to-year budget and looking at the fund balance out in the long term. To Ms. Reed's point, we have a very healthy fund balance.
So that's what we're looking at right now in total fund balance.
Does the state remember, I'm trying to think, when the state was talking about what our ending fund balance should look like, did they kind of back off on that?
Went away, but none of us think that it's gone away for good.
They were really questioning, and I remember one time it actually came up where they were talking about penalizing school districts that had
Large fund balance.
large fund balances.
Our attitude has always been that having a substantial fund balance makes you a lot more nimble, and you can adjust to things during the year and so forth.
Nimble's a good word.
All right.
Calendar.
Woo-hoo.
Okay, this calendar is going to look very similar to previous years. Significant dates to keep in mind are our approval of campus-based staffing in April, action on growth and improvement and compensation in June, and then the big adoption of the budget and the tax rate in August.
Is that when we had it last year, the approval to hire the campus-based staffing?
It is.
It wasn't earlier?
No.
That was it?
What we've tried to do pretty consistently is bring you the growth and improvement packages, which include campus-based staffing, in mid-April, and then seek your approval at the end of April, which still gives us a jump on the hiring season.
Brian, we ran into problems, there were, I'm thinking more of some of the hard-to-fill positions we ran into where, they were being, it seemed like we were behind a little bit, where we had individuals that we wanted to hire, but we weren't at that point yet, and so we ended up losing some of them to other school districts. And that actually came from HR, had said that too, that, so I just want to make sure that we're giving approval early enough where people can make offers.
Yeah, I don't perceive that an April approval date, I mean, this is, as it is, it's a month earlier than what we used to do. I don't perceive that that's a holdup. There may be other holdups, but I don't perceive that this is it.
Yeah, this is it. Okay.
All right, that concludes my presentation. I appreciate your time and attention, and if you have any other questions, I'll be glad to try and answer.
Good job, Wes.
Okay, I think we're good to go unless we want to start shooting out more questions, guys?
So
No?
we'll be back
No?
in,
Okay, thank
in
you.
order to prevent that, yeah, so.
Okay,
and
oh, that's right.
We'll be back in April for the growth and improvement review, and I look at compensation, start to make some recommendations there. So we'll have a much more in-depth session in April.
Thank you very much.
All right.
All right, moving right along to item 16, Superintendent. We are going to be looking at board member attendance at Texas Alliance of Black School Educators Annual State Conference. Recommended action for approval for, I assume it's Bobby, right? Right? Didn't you want to go?
Yes, that's
Yes,
correct.
okay.
Right.
Thank you. Oh, Ms. Chumley, did you have a question?
Oh, Bobby, are you presenting?
No,
No, I was hoping that you were presenting
no,
there.
and I tell you, no, I'd actually, so it's here in San Antonio, so they'd asked me for some suggestions, so I actually encouraged like Willie White and some other board members in the San Antonio area to serve and help present.
Well, that was
Is it
nice.
okay if I give a little bit more?
Oh, please
so
do,
everybody
please do.
knows? Yeah, so everybody knows what's going on with that one, even though it's a school educator conference. Why it's here is reaching out to others. So there's actually a student-only session that they've encouraged high school and middle school students that they're going to have. There's also a community session. And then, like I mentioned last time, this is as a part of this on that February 20th, which I know is a busy day. And that's the part I'm really interested in. There's a school board session also. So it's not the
Really?
whole thing. No, it's just that.
Same time as grassroots?
No, it's earlier. 9:30 to I think 2:30 is when they have the school board session. It's something different they're doing too, and then grassroots is at night. So that's the real interest I have. So if anybody else is interested, that would be the part to look at.
I'd like to see, I bet the student piece will be
Bet that would be neat.
interesting.
Yeah. I'll send y'all the. I think I have the. I have the flyer. I'll send y'all out to y'all 'cause they're trying to get students out there, et cetera, and you may know some that may be interested. As well as the community one sounds pretty interesting too, but I'll send y'all the flyer for that.
So this could be plural then, board members
I hope so.
attendance?
Yeah, I
Okay,
would think so, yeah.
all right, so we'd include that in the,
Not for those necessarily, I'll find out. Definitely for the, my Uber.
No, just
Just kidding, you gotta watch it. We come up with some stuff you never know about. But anyway, definitely for the February 20th, Pete, but the other ones, I don't think so. I'll find out.
okay, thank you.
I move
Ms.
approval.
Freeman? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. We're still open to talk about it.
No, do we have any teacher, is this the one that Valerie had?
No,
Okay,
That's the
when,
caucus.
where did she get the award from?
Different group.
that's,
Okay.
this is-
That's a caucus of African-American school board members.
right, that's
Okay,
the
thank you.
That's a different group.
Okay.
All right, any other questions? All right, do I hear a motion?
I move approval.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. All right, the ayes have it.
Good,
We got it approved. Thank you.
Great.
And I think we are adjourning at 7:55.
Good job.
Yay, woohoo.
Good job.